Look at this build-up shape. It might seem like a normal back four with a single midfielder. However, if you take a closer look, that midfielder is actually a center back from the back three, while the fullbacks are attacking wingbacks. And if you are looking for the actual midfielders, then you'll have to go even further up the pitch, where they're positioned near the striker. And now look at their shape in the final third. This is the bizarre tactics of Fabian Hürzeler St Pauli. He is a man who plays almost no midfielder and has formation like 3-0-7 or 5-0-5, a formation where you can't really define a player's actual positions and see more false roles than true roles. And using these, Hürzeler led a club that had been struggling for more than a decade in the second division to finally secure promotion to the Bundesliga. And now he has replaced Zerbi as a new coach at Brighton, becoming the youngest ever manager in the Premier League. So what exactly are these unique tactics of Fabian Hürzeler, and why we don't see midfielders in his system? Let's discuss in this video. So to answer the second question of their no midfield approach, we need to first dive a bit deeper into football tactics, where you will find mainly two ideologies that are opposite to each other. When you move towards the left, you'll see formations with more structure, where each player is given specific roles to fulfill, and even when they interchange positions, they maintain the overall shape of the team. And this ideology is known as positionism, where the likes of Pep Guardiola, Zerbi, and Arteta usually lies. However, when you shift towards the right, this is where the formations doesn't really exist, where each player is free to roam around the pitch without worrying about the actual shape. So you'll often see more numbers overloading small spaces to gain superiority. And this ideology is known as relationism, where the actual relationship between players are more important than keeping a solid formation. And this is where coaches like Fernando Diniz and Michel usually lies. However, when you look at the tactics of Fabian Hürzeler, he don't prefer to be on either end and tends to sit in the middle by combining the two, where his system keeps the structure of positionism, but he also gives certain players the freedom to roam, bringing a bit of relationism as well. For example, when you look at his build-up shape, if the opposition is a high-pressing side that go man-to-man, then instead of overloading the backline with pivots, Hürzeler doesn't even use them and pushes them further up the pitch to form a front five. So to fill that gap, he lets one of his center-backs take the pivot role, while the goalkeeper steps up to fill the vacant spot. This creates a massive 6-0-5 shape, with 5 players in the backline, while the other 5 placed in the front line. So with no players positioned in the midfield, this forces the opposition's pivots to make a tough decision. If they press the backline to restrict their build-up, then Hürzeler's men can easily play long balls towards their front 5, where they have numerical superiority against the opposition's backline. And if they track back to prevent the long balls, then Fabian can easily build up with his massive 6v4 superiority. And apart from that, due to the absence of a midline, it also stretches the opposition's structure from both the sides, which then creates a massive space in the central area. So Hürzeler often target this area as a means to connect both the lines. For example, when the ball is with the keeper, the middle center-back who is in the advanced position usually drops deeper to receive the ball and quickly passes it to the nearest center-back. So this movement attracts the opposition's front line towards the back 3, which then frees up the wide fullbacks to invert into the central space and receive the third pass to continue advancing. However, when the ball is with a fullback, then you often see the advanced pivot dropping deep to receive the ball, and then making a forward pass to the advancing center back. So these two movements pulls the opposition's deeper markers forward, freeing up the front 5 to receive the final pass and gain massive superiority against the vulnerable backline. However, if the oppositions are a low block side who prioritize their defense over pressing, then this shape wouldn't stretch the oppositions effectively. So in such scenarios, Hürzeler switches to his plan B approach, where he lets one of his advanced pivots drop deep and join the false 6, while the other pivot and the striker acts like 2 number 10s. So instead of maintaining only 2 horizontal lines, Hürzeler overloads the midfield to create 2 extra lines. And by doing this, it forces the opposition to stretch their structure vertically, which then allows to create space either by targeting the gap behind the center backs or outnumbering the central space created by their box midfield. When St Pauli moves into the attacking half, the structure looks more like a 3-0-7 or a 3-1-6. As similar to a false 9, Fabian introduced the concept of false 10s with his pivots, who usually stay high up the pitch most of the time. However, with almost no midfielders at the center, there's no direct connection between the back three and the front line. So Fabian often lets his middle defender to again advance and act as a false pivot. So with 6 or 7 players joining the front line, St Pauli completely outnumbers the opposition's backline by gaining a +2 advantage in each area. However, even with this overload, if the front line is placed horizontally, the opposition typically prioritizes protecting the central area. This reduces the effectiveness of the front overload and forces them to rely on long crosses or through balls from the wide. So to tackle this, Hürzeler gives both false 10s the freedom to seek relationism. So instead of staying to a one particular area, they constantly roams where the ball is and help the front 5 wherever needed. For example, when the ball is with the wingback who faces a 2v2 scenario along with the winger, you'll often see the false 10s drifting wide towards the ball carrier and create a numerical advantage on the wing. And if the opposition tries to cover this overload and commits more numbers, it then opens up space in central areas or on the opposite side, allowing rest of the front line to make runs and exploit these gaps. So this flexibility turns the false 10s into extra playmakers or forwards who create space for teammates by pulling markers away or move into unexpected open spaces to score. And as a result, when Hürzeler took charge at St Pauli, Marcel Hartel, who had never scored more than 5 goals in a season as a pivot, shockingly scored 21 goals and made 16 assists by just playing as a false 10. So this highlights the effectiveness of Hürzeler's false 10s in transforming St Pauli's attacking play. However, with only 3 players at the back, it might seem like an open invitation for the opposition to counterattack. Yet despite this, St Pauli conceded the least amount of goals last season, and this success is all due to their clever counter-pressing tactics. As the moment they lose the ball, Fabian instantly transforms his 7 attackers into 7 defenders. For instance, if a winger loses the ball, both he and the nearest player quickly press the ball carrier, and simultaneously the players positioned a bit further back also makes covering runs to block the secondary passing options, while the players who are furthest out are ready to close off all the potential long passes. So by creating multiple layers of pressure with his front overload, Hürzeler adds an extra protection for the backline. However, if they can't win the ball back even with this, then they quickly regroup into a compact defensive shape. And what makes this shape unique is the narrow pentagon formed by the front 3 and the pivots. The main reason for this is that whenever the oppositions build up from deep, instead of man marking, they constantly maintain this shape to block all the central options of the ball carrier. And even if the opposition manages to pass to a central player, the pentagon immediately presses the receiver from all sides, forcing them to return the ball. This pressurized the oppositions to go wider, and with the pivots given the free roles, they quickly moved to cover wide passing options rather than staying central. Meanwhile, the back 5 allows the wingbacks to apply aggressive man-to-man press on the ball carrier. So this effectively locks down the passing angles from all sides. And if the opposition tries to retreat and move back, Hürzeler's men quits their zonal structure and applies an intense man press to push them even further back. And apart from this, another crucial aspect of Fabian's defensive setup is that he instructs his backline to position their bodies in a side-on manner, as he believes that when the backline are facing horizontally, and if the opposition play a direct pass to them, defenders have to turn their entire body before starting their run, which then reduces their speed compared to the forwards. However, when they're facing vertically, it allows them to react quickly and track the runs with the same speed as the attackers. And this concept was beautifully explained by the Football Analyst in their article, which you can check out in the description. One of the weaknesses St Pauli often faced under Hürzeler was their vulnerability in wide areas. As with both pivots advancing, the back 3 would adjust into a 2+1 narrow setup. And if their layered style of counter-pressing didn't work, the opposition would easily target the wide areas. So to counter this, Fabian occasionally instructs his wingback to drop into the pivot role or take on the wide center-back position. This adds an extra protection in the center, while also giving flexibility to stretch their shape wider. However, while this approach may have worked well against St Pauli's oppositions, it became more problematic after Fabian moved to Brighton, where stronger teams could easily exploit this vulnerability. So as a result, Fabian has shifted to a more traditional 4-2-3-1 formation at Brighton, as this adjustment provides better defensive balance and ensures his team remains more resilient against top teams like Manchester City and Liverpool. So looking at the back three, with both pivots pushing higher up the pitch, the middle defender takes on a libero role, who steps up as a false number 6 during possession and stays back to reinforce the back three while defending. While on the flanks, both wingbacks does the hybrid role of inverting and staying wide, where they usually inverts into central spaces during build-up and then advances wide to overload the front line in the final third. In the midfield, both central mids excels in doing relationist duties as roaming playmakers. They move fluidly across the pitch to maintain overloads around the ball or positions themselves into open spaces as a goal scorer, while the wingers typically stay wide along with the wingbacks, as when playing out from the flanks due to their front seven, Fabian positions at least 5 players inside the box and keeps 2 players on the flanks. This causes a real trouble to the opposition about which side to focus their overload, often causing their structure to split and leaving some players unmarked. So this allows the wingers 2 options to make: either release the ball to the underlapping partner in the half space or stay wide and whip in across where 5-man overload can break through the back line. Looking at his mentality, with almost all his players in an advanced positions, Fabian likes to maintain control over the game, as this helps to maintain stability with his front overloads and minimizes the risk of being frequently exposed at the back. Also similar to Zerbi, he likes to break the opposition structure in quick seconds by using third-man combinations, so you really need a high tempo to implement that. At defense, Fabian employs a high line where he relies on his front overload as the first line of defense after losing the ball. Also, while defending, he always instructs his backline to position in a same line, as this makes it easier for them to move coordinately and catch the opposition's offside. In the final third, they often prefer working the ball into the box with through balls. With a heavy front overload and minimal midfield presence, they have to rely on through passes to progress from the back and use third-man combinations. So overall, at just 31, Hürzeler has introduced a new creative approach that will be replicated by more managers in the future. It is the era where you can't really define a player's identity and will expect each of them to do multiple roles at once. And with his new chapter at Brighton, he's already impressing English fans with remarkable results, so it will be really exciting to see how he continues the legacy after Zerbi and takes Brighton even further. And just like Brighton, when we go further up north, Liverpool, a club managed by Klopp for nearly a decade, have also found a new man who presses even more intensely yet maintains a balanced structure. He is a man who hates wide crosses and often plays almost all of his players centrally. So what exactly are these wild tactics of Arne Slot, and why Liverpool choose him after Klopp? Let's find out by clicking this video. Hope to see you there.